Stay tuned for today's episode of Breaking the Biz, an informative podcast where we dive into the world of entertainment by interviewing seasoned professionals who have made their mark in the industry. Gain invaluable insights as they share their personal journeys, offering advice on navigating the dynamic landscape of the entertainment industry. Whether you're an aspiring actor, musician, filmmaker, author, animator, or any creative soul, tune in for expert career guidance, insider tips, and first-hand accounts on breaking into the entertainment industry. Get ready to unlock the secrets behind successful careers and fuel your own passion for the limelight. Please remember to like this video and to subscribe to our channels for more great conversations.
Greetings from Breaking the Biz, brought to you by Yes I Can Unity Through Music and Education. I'm William Felber, your navigator through the intriguing universe of the entertainment industry, as revealed by the visionaries and creators who bring it to life. Stay tuned as we delve into diverse insights from the forefront of entertainment, hearing from pioneers, creators, and agents of change. Prepare for a journey filled with tales of innovation, resilience, and the undying quest for artistic brilliance.
Welcome to Breaking the Biz podcast with the Yes I Can crew. We have got a great guest with us tonight. We have Mason Lieberman, who is a senior composer, game audio supervisor, and educator, kind of does it all. He's an award-winning composer, audio director, and producer known for his contributions to the gaming and anime catalog. He prides himself on being a problem solver whose biggest passion is always to connect people through music. Having started his professional journey as a freelance composer, he is most known for his work composing on anime series like Rooster, Beyblade, Burst Evolution, amongst many others. His music has enhanced the heroics of franchises like Spider-Man, Mobile Suit Gundam, Ultraman, PlayerUnknown, Battlegrounds, while leading epic gravitas titles like Apex Legends Mobile, Eden, Game for Peace, Devil Engine, and many others. In 2009, he partnered with Asia Pacific government officials as an international ambassador to Australia, representing the video game music industry. As a multi-instrumentalist, Mason has had the great pleasure of working with a wide variety of media franchises, with personal favorites including, get this guys, Pokémon, Star Wars Visions, The Rising of Shield Hero, Nintendo Super Smash Bros., Riot Games, League of Legends, AMC's The Walking Dead, Made in Abyss, Eden's Tower of God, Warhammer, Hell's Kitchen, and God Eater. As a public speaker, Mason has addressed passionate audience on subjects related to film scoring, anime music production, video game scoring, and music theory. He has lectured academically at Harvard University, UCLA, Musicians Institute, Berklee College of Music. He kind of does it all. He was thrilled to present the official Cowboy Bebop charity single, The Real Folk Blues, in collaboration with Funimation, Sunrise, featuring special guest artists like Yoko Kanno and the Seatbelts. The original arrangement hit number 6 on Billboard Global Digital Song Sales chart, as well as number 1 on the rock charts in Japan. In 2021, he shared the Best Score Award at the Crunchyroll Anime Awards. I think that is by far the coolest name for any award show ever. So, Mason, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for the very in-depth introduction, Brett.
Awesome. I want to talk first of all, because you know, in your bio you talk about music connecting us all. When did you personally fall in love with music?
Great question. So when I was about 3 years old, I was a very hyperactive kid, couldn't focus on anything, like most 3-year-olds. And my parents showed me an old Disney movie, Fantasia, came out in the 1940s. And there's this one scene in the middle during the Sorcerer's Apprentice sequence where Mickey is dancing with a broom, and it's beautiful, beautiful music. And for reasons that we couldn't quite understand at the time, I was just obsessed with it. I just kept telling my parents, with the limited vocabulary of a 3-year-old, that I wanted a broom. And of course, they would give me a broom, and I seemed very dissatisfied. And over the course of about a year and a half, 2 years, this kept coming up. It was my favorite movie. I constantly asked for a broom. They constantly gave me one, and it wasn't what I wanted. At a local orchestral kind of petting zoo event, like a local symphony orchestra where I grew up, doing an event for orchestra for children to introduce people to music, the cello section was introduced, and I very notoriously stood up in the chair and shouted, "That's a broom," at which point my parents realized, oh, this little monster's been asking for a cello since he was 3 years old. He can't focus on anything, but he could focus long enough to keep asking for that. Maybe we should try and see if that's something we can do. And they went on kind of like the pre-eBay version of like buying something online, and they found like an 8th size cello, so like the tiniest thing you can imagine, and I started playing cello from the age of 5.
Wow. Definitely some amazing skills. So you play cello at 5. When do they start realizing, there's some skill and some talent here and some abilities that others don't have? Well, let's get him some other instruments to learn.
Well, I really didn't start other instruments until probably middle school. I ended up buying Guitar Hero when I was a kid, and I got really into it. And I was like, all right, I'm going to learn guitar. It can't be that hard. As far as figuring out that maybe music was going to be a career path for me, pretty young. I made my symphonic debut when I was like 11 years old, as far as performing with like the East Texas Symphony Orchestra. I made my debut at Lincoln Center by the time I was 12 and a half. And I performed with orchestras and around the country for basically my entire childhood. I learned to file my taxes very early. So it very quickly became clear that was kind of the direction that my career was going. As far as learning other instruments, middle school towards high school. Okay.
And when you were in high school, were you part of a band? I mean, obviously very early, you're playing with orchestras and you're getting that experience. Did you ever create the rock band? Did you ever have that experience?
A terrible rock band, of which virtually no real evidence remains at this point. But our name was McDougan. It was not good. I just need you to know how terrible this band was. But we mostly played like classic rock. It was fun stuff.
Okay. From there, did you have any, I mean, obviously your parents saw the talent and knew that you were musically inclined. With that knowledge of being able to play music, did you know exactly that you were going to go into film scoring and video game music? When did that hit?
So my big goal as a kid was always video game music. And I didn't really know that composer was like a job that you could have. Like in my head, I never really thought all that deeply about the fact that most of the music I'd play in orchestra was written by people who died hundreds of years ago. In my head, like people weren't currently composers. That had all just been done. And I didn't really think in my head about the separation between songwriters and composers. So I thought maybe I'll be a songwriter or something. But I always wanted to be involved in music, and I thought maybe I could get involved in video games as a cello player. Maybe I could record on soundtracks. And the thing that was always really, really kind of pushing me to practice, more than actually wanting to be any kind of stable or successful in music, was that I really loved video games. I was like, someday I want to be a part of Super Smash Brothers. That's when I'll know that I've made it. Like, that is the peak of the coolest thing that I could do in, 10-year-old Mason's head. And also in current Mason's head.
I was going to say, and you get to check that off the checkbox. So what's your process once you graduate high school? How do you pursue your education in order to reach these career goals and ones that you actually knocked off the list?
Totally. So first things first, I graduated high school a little bit on the young side. Through a combination of skipping some years when I was very young and then just being very young relative to the year cycle, I graduated high school when I was 16 years old. And my parents, pretty intelligently in my opinion, felt like if I went off to a really distant college that was super expensive, I was probably going to be wasting the money. So I should start off reasonably local, save some money, save up, and then if I decide at 18 that I still want to pursue this, follow my dreams, see what happens. So I started at a local state school about 90 minutes from where I grew up called Stephen F. Austin State University. And I went there because they had a cello professor who I'd been studying with for a number of years, who was absolutely amazing, Dr. Evgeny Raichev, still a huge mentor and someone I care about deeply. And it was actually at my audition for that college that I first began seriously considering the idea of being a composer, because I'd written my own piece of music for my audition, thinking that that would be easier and faster than trying to memorize someone else's. And I was like, I'm not trying to work that hard. I'm sure that I'll get in. It'll be fine. I'll just write something quickly and I'll audition with that. And, I'm comfortable with improv, so I can mostly improvise this and it won't be a big deal. And after I did the audition, they were like, wow, we really loved that piece of music. Who was the composer? And I was like, oh, I wrote it. And they were like, oh, are you planning to be a composition major? I don't know. I didn't realize that was an option. You should go and talk to the composition program director. And I did, and he was the most staggeringly intelligent person I'd ever met. And I just felt like the dumbest human alive, oh my God, I know absolutely nothing about all of this stuff that I think that I've got totally figured out at the age of 16. I should study with this guy. He knows what he's doing. And by far, one of the best educators I've ever known.
It is, I love that story because sometimes obviously at 16, you're a very intelligent 16-year-old, but at 16, most teenagers think they have it all figured out. And it's great to kind of to experience somebody going, seeing the talent, you composed your own music, you wrote it yourself, but to know, hey, with that talent, this is a door that can now be opened for you to follow. So you meet this instructor, you're like, okay, that's the path I'm going to go. How long do you stay in college? Or do you breeze through that as well?
So I did 2 years at this place till I was 18. And my goal when I'd been in high school was that I wanted to attend Berklee College of Music up in Boston, because it was, in my opinion, the absolute best modern music program. And I wanted to study modern music. I felt like I'd kind of spent my entire career up to that point in classical music, and really I was a lot more interested in video games and movies and TV and anime and jazz and things that I never really got a ton of exposure to growing up. I grew up in rural East Texas. There wasn't a ton of culture in that particular area, and I didn't have a ton of opportunities to get out there and feel like I could be connected to the pulse of the modern industry. So I wanted to go there, but I was too young. And when I finally turned 18, my parents basically said, look, you're an adult, give or take. You can audition wherever you want. You can go where you want. We support you, and within reason, if you are able to secure scholarship to cover what you need to do that, if there's a certain amount left over at that point, we will help you out with college. And I was like, that's all that I need. I can work for this and I can figure it out. So I auditioned for Berklee, and between scholarship, working the entire time that I was there, I basically held down 2 full-time jobs almost my entire time in undergrad. And then finally, support from my parents, because they did help. I managed to get through without basically taking on major debt, which really helped a lot in this case. I've always been very, very direct with people about the fact that oftentimes when you're trying to start a career in something, one of the biggest challenges that's going to face you is the opportunity cost of everything else that you could be doing to earn money, but which slows down your career path because you can't focus as much time on getting truly excellent at what you do and expanding your network. And because I kept my cost of living as low as physically possible post-college, and I didn't have massive, massive student debt, that helped a lot for me actually starting and launching my career. And I think was a large part of why I was able to begin doing things kind of at the rate that I did.
It's interesting too, the fact that you talked about having two jobs, taking away from learning your craft and putting in those early 10,000 hours. You obviously got a jump start on that 10,000 hours being very young. But you are absolutely right. Most people come out of college with tons of debt and have to pay that back their entire life. So coming out of college and not having that debt and then just being able to focus and put your passions towards what you want to do, phenomenal. So you graduate. What was your degree in?
So my degree was kind of like a build your own degree path program called professional music. And I generally studied video game music, music production, music business. I tried to more or less focus on all the things that I felt like I had a weakness in and that I didn't have a background in. Because I was reasonably confident in myself as a cello player. I kind of had the professional success at that point to indicate that if I needed to, I could survive in that direction. So it made more sense to learn things that I didn't know anything about and try and expand my skill set. And absolutely, my career in general has gone in the direction of the things that I tried to learn that I did not know about prior to that point.
Okay.
It was the right call.
So what's the first job that you land, and does your college help you? Many times we hear about different colleges having internship programs or things where they connect you with employers. Was that the case with you, or did you just knock down doors yourself?
I would say it's a combination between the two. I would say that objectively speaking, I would not have gotten into the work that I do now without the college that I attended. But I actually say that goes for both places, because the first two major gigs that I got came about through direct connections I built up at Berkeley and at Stephen F. Austin, which honestly surprised me because in my head I was like, oh, I'm going to go to this big fancy college in like Boston that's famous for like its musical connections. That's going to give me my career. The time that I spent in like the Podunk University in the middle of nowhere, that's not going to lead to anything. But actually, the second job, and I would say the one that kind of began my career really, was the one that I got from the smaller university that didn't have the same type of connections. I actually started working while I was still in college. In addition to being an RA and in addition to constantly gigging, I was part of the school's basically recording staff as someone who recorded cello solos for like every single film scoring student the entire time that I was there. Like I was a salaried paid employee who was like delivering recorded music because that was what I could do to earn some money to help pay for the cost of living, because it was expensive as all hell. And over time, that meant that I met a lot of composers. And meeting a lot of composers led to opportunities playing gigs with composers or getting called to do sessions with bands and more and on, and generally building up the confidence with the idea of recording. The first major job that I got was actually working for a professor at Berkeley, Jeff Williams, on this Rooster Teeth series that he was composer for called RWBY, which was a very popular anime-influenced thing that began about 10 years ago. And he actually wasn't one of my professors, but I was hanging out in the dorms my freshman year, and a friend of mine was showing me some music that was cool, and he showed me the opening theme from that show, which is a cool rock song. And I was like, oh, this is really awesome. I love the tune. And he told me, he's like, guess what? All the drums in it, fake. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, what are you talking about? And like, that blew my mind because like in music production, we have this concept of like sequencing drums, sequencing instruments, like using virtual instruments to replicate live acoustic instruments and it's sounding as good as the real thing. And these drums were sequenced so well that I, as a musician, literally couldn't tell that they weren't live drums. So it blew, young Mason's mind, and I was like, I need to learn how he did that. And my friend was like, well, he's a professor here. You could probably find his email and ask him. So I found the guy's email, and I was like, hey, can I just show up to your office hour even though I'm not actually in your class? I have some questions about drums. And he's like, yeah, sure, come on down. I showed up. I felt like I learned more in that one office hour than I'd been learning in most of my classes that semester. And I decided, screw it, I'm just going to show up at this guy's office hour every single week until I feel like I've learned everything that I can. And I showed up every single week until I graduated college. And sure enough, he was the person who ended up offering me that first job when I graduated. I was unemployed for like 3 months post-college. I didn't manage to book any internships. And I posted on Facebook something to the effect of, time to apply for a job at Guitar Center because at least they'll understand if I get a gig. And he messaged me and he's like, I don't know why you want to work for Guitar Center when you should be working for me. Point. I'll do it. And that was how I got that first gig.
I absolutely love that story. And I want to really point out, it is never the desire to learn and better yourself, taking advantage of meeting an instructor on their hour time when you're not in their class, and how cool that instructor has to be. And the fact that you showed up each time reminds me of a book, Tuesday with Maury, where, the guy's just getting information from somebody who's just passing out that, almost like meeting with a Yoda. But fantastic. So, and sometimes it's very true. People don't know that you're looking for a job. You can't just look at somebody and know that what they want to do or they're looking, so you have to put it out there. And what a better way to, and it's so comical, like the Guitar Center thing, because yes, they would understand that you're gigging and, canceling work. But fantastic. So
logic, at least. I was like,
yeah, no, it was great logic, and it absolutely makes sense. So you get that first gig and you're now, at that first job, are you composing music? Are you okay? And is that for anime?
So I got hired as an assistant and pretty rapidly rose up to being a composer on the show. And it's an animated series. It's anime style, but it's made in the West, so I would call it like a cartoon. And that was the start of my career. I was composing for linear media, for, a TV show, basically. And that sort of set the trajectory for the rest of my career. We finished the season. That season's soundtrack hit #1 on iTunes, so it was pretty cool for my first project to have something that had performed really well. And at the end of season 3, I worked on seasons 2 and 3, I left the show, and after being gloriously unemployed for 9 months and making my way off of gigging and, picking up weddings and things like that, I ended up getting called by a friend I'd made at my first undergrad at the place in East Texas saying, hey, you worked on RWBY, right? Yeah? Do you still know how to play guitar? Because we'd done like a random collaboration when I was at the first place. I'm like, yeah, no, definitely. He's like, and like, like the kind of J-rocky, like Japanese music thing, like you can do that? Yep, that's what we did on RWBY. Okay, can you come like record a bunch of stuff for me for Beyblade? And then that led to composing for Beyblade. And then, I started booking work in Japan, and it all just sort of spiraled from there.
Talk me through being able to compose in Japan, because I know you're well traveled. Talk me through working in Japan and what's that like.
Sure. So I do a lot of work on Japanese anime, on TV shows, and oftentimes it's actually got a little bit of overlap conceptually with writing music for video games, because both of them, when you're working in traditional film and TV in the West, like American film or TV, you're usually scoring to picture. So you have the footage in front of you, and you're making music in real time based on what's going on, and you're hitting to as many like cuts and edits as possible. When you work in video games, often your work is done before visualization is complete. And so you're scoring for environments and characters and feels, and you're building up an interactive system that covers the entire game. When you work on anime, you actually also write before there's footage, which means that really you're kind of writing for what you think the scene is going to feel like a little bit, and you're hitting for overarching emotional beats. When you work on Western film or TV, you can, duck underneath dialogue. You can write around moments. And so you can kind of really, really Mickey Mouse and get super detailed on like individual moments in a way that you can't with anime. With anime, all you really have is the story. And the question is, what's going to communicate this story moment? What's going to give you this vibe? Probably a melody, probably a strong melody, probably compelling harmony, probably all of the things that in Western film and TV we consider a little bit too forward and a little too ostentatious and a little too crazy. So when you write for anime, you end up writing really what I find very musically compelling art that ends up being very, you music edit it into the scene once you've got that footage. So it's a little bit of a different workflow.
It's fascinating. Talk me through, getting that Smash Bros. How quickly after, your first job, you're now composing and working on an anime show in Japan. What's next? I mean, is Smash Bro like, do you just knock it out the park, home run right away?
That was actually before that point. So I booked Smash Bros. When I was like 19 or 20, while I was still in Berkeley in Boston. And what had ended up happening, you know how I told you that I was like kind of getting passed around as like a recording musician, playing on all these different people's stuff. Ultimately, what ended up happening is I started getting booked a lot. This is completely a non sequitur as far as the connection, but it will make sense in a moment. I started getting booked a ton for like Spanish and Latin grunge music for some reason. Like I just did a good job on a gig and got mentioned to other people who were on the bill. And before I knew it, I was recording for them. And before I knew it, their engineer was referring me to someone else. And I just sort of like chain of connection kept booking all these random gigs in like the Spanish music scene in Boston. And over the course of about 6 months of this, I end up eventually getting passed to someone who was a contractor and engineer who worked out in New York, who didn't even work in Boston, and who ended up calling me and telling me, hey, Mason, I've got a session for you, but it's in New York, and I'm gonna be real with you, it doesn't actually pay all that well, but, like, I know that you want to do this. Like, I promise you want to do it, but also I can't tell you what it is, so can you just come for it? Can you just do the thing? And, being a young, 19-year-old kid with nothing to lose, I was like, yeah, sure, that doesn't sound like a way to get kidnapped whatsoever. And I took a megabus down to New York for like $2 and ended up going to this session. And it was a 12-hour session, but I show up, 8 a.m., crack of dawn. We do 3 hours of the same kind of shit I'd been doing with all these other bands. And then they call it and they're like, okay, we're good. Everyone's clear. You stay. And they point at me and I'm like, oh no, am I in trouble? About 30, 40 minutes pass. I'm just sort of sitting in this studio wondering what the hell's going on. And then a bunch of old hat New York session players start filling in. Guys in their 50s, 60s, people who've been playing these sessions for longer than I've been alive, by a lot. And suddenly, we've gone from a string orchestra setup to a full orchestra setup. I've been told to stay, and I am principal cello player for this particular setup, which is, a great honor, being the person who gets to do the solos if there are solos. And at that point, they distribute sheet music, and I discover that it's Smash Bros. And it was one of the funniest things conceptually in my head, because the more I've thought about it, and to this day, this is just a personal theory I have, but with the way that I understand that studios get booked nowadays, I'm pretty sure that what had happened is that Nintendo needed about 8 or 9 hours of session time to record, wanted the discount rate for a 12-hour lockout session, but didn't want to pay for the hours that they had, so they had their, contractor book the lockout and then double book another client for the 3 hours that started the session, so that they could go ahead and get that rate and get that discount, but still not have to pay as much. Meaning that I basically got to record for Smash Bros. Because I was really good at Latin grunge music. That had nothing to do with the fact that of what we were doing on Smash Bros. It was all like orchestral action stuff for like Final Destination and for some of the other stages in the game. But it was like a really funny thing when I think about it in retrospect of like, Yeah, if I had to summarize why I ended up getting booked for Smash Bros, I guess maybe it was like Spanish lessons in second grade, maybe? I don't know.
It all comes full circle at some point. What I think is really neat is that you just kind of said yes to an experience that maybe you weren't so comfortable with, jumping on a bus, going down to New York. You mentioned, like, what a better way to get kidnapped, or I thought that's where it was going to go when they said stay in this room. But
I didn't know what it was going to be, but I was like, you know what? The guy who I'd done the gig with was a cool guy. I'd done a couple of gigs with him in the past. He'd always taken care of me. He'd always paid me on time. He'd always been like, a nice dude who'd like grab me a snack or something before we play. And I was like, you know what? If he says it's going to be a good session, he knows me. He knows what I'm into. I've always been very upfront with people about the fact that I'm a giant nerd and that I love video game music. And like, that was always like the first thing anyone who meets me would know about me. So I was like, he probably has my best interests at heart. I don't think I'm about to get trafficked.
It's also, I love the fact because it shows sometimes saying yes to an opportunity opens up other doors. It also shows, the importance of networking and doing a good job. And being a freelance musician, so to speak, you are only as good as your last performance. And when indeed people know they can trust you, you come in, you knock it out of the park. You get a positive reputation for being that musician that's going to get the job done. And I can already tell, I mean, you're an amazing personality and a good soul. Those are the type of people that you want to work with. You don't want to work with the pretentious, the egotistical cello player who, doesn't have a sense of humor. But how cool is it to come full circle, love Smash Bros, and then get that opportunity to record music for Nintendo? And I'm sure we're similar age, growing up and playing the Nintendo and all those early games and being exposed. It's a dream to be able to compose music for Nintendo. But you do music and compose for so many cool things. I know that the listeners here are like, ask him about Spider-Man. What about Star Wars? So let's talk about some of those gigs, and then we'll specifically talk about how you do your composing for video games.
Sure. So it's all over the place. Every project is different. For Spider-Man and Star Wars, Spider-Man I wrote some music for, and Star Wars I've actually recorded for multiple times for different projects. Most recently, Star Wars Visions, which was the anime series, I did a lot of cello solos for one of the episodes, because each episode was produced by a different studio. So they had entirely different creative teams for every single episode, by and large. For Star Wars, that was actually something that I did, or for Spider-Man, sorry. For Spider-Man, that was actually something that I did as a composer for Tencent in my role in-house as like a composer and audio director, where when Spider-Man No Way Home was rolling out, they had partnerships with a lot of major video games to put Spider-Man in the game in some way and include content. And so for me, I'm a music director with PUBG Mobile, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds Mobile. And we had Spider-Man in the game, and that meant that there was going to have to be Spider-Man music. And that meant that we were going to have missions where you played as Spider-Man. We needed to create a whole thing for it. And so, I had a lot of fun working with the people from Marvel to make sure that we had the vision and vibe correct from Marvel Gaming. Because, obviously when it's a character like that who you grow up loving and who has a lot of really, really iconic, definitive representations in media, as a fan, you already know what Spider-Man sounds like. You know what music for Spider-Man should feel like. Danny Elfman has done music for Spider-Man. Hans Zimmer has done music for Spider-Man. John Paisano. There have been so many great composers who've done great music for this character. And so you want to make sure that you're not the weak link in the chain of really, really cool musical experiences that go back, in Spider-Man's case, 60 years.
It's so This is so super cool. And you mentioned some pretty big name composers. I absolutely get it. Did your parents ever think, man, cello is going to open up so many doors and gigs? Like you always hear people who, sometimes you get like a history major and they're like, they do nothing with their major or nothing with what they learned. You have an instrument that you wouldn't think would be so, in demand, but for you, it's opened up so many doors.
It's funny because I don't know if I believe this, but this is what my parents have always said to me. They always claimed that they never had any doubts for me, and they had doubts for most of my friends in cohort in general, because they felt that the thing that really determined it wasn't the fact that I started as a cello player or that I was particularly good at it or anything like that. It was the fact that I was motivated and focused toward a specific goal. It was the fact that from the age of 5 onward, I knew exactly what I wanted to be, and so everything that I was doing was focused towards that. And they felt that was the thing that was relevant. They didn't really think that it mattered whether I would go to college or not, because they figured I'd probably find a way to be a musician professionally one way or another regardless. I'd already been working as a musician in many ways since I was 12 years old. But I think that, in my opinion, I kind of think that that's all cap. I think they're just no, we probably thought we were going to be supporting you for the rest of our lives. So.
Yeah, I love the fact. No, we knew it. Obviously you're driven.
They knew it. Whether that's true or not.
Yeah, no, it's always a good to when something works, be like, yeah, I knew it was going to work.
Yeah, I don't know that I knew that it was going to work. So I don't know where they got that from, but
Let me ask you, for somebody who wants to get into composing music for the industry, if that's radio, television, film, anime, video games, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into the work you do?
All right. So I'm going to kind of go through the process of what hiring looks like and why someone gets hired. And I'm a nerd, so I'm going to call this the Turing test as a joke on the Turing test for computing. Imagine we have a rock band tour, and I have 2 musicians. 1, 2. Both of them are good enough to do the job. Being good enough probably disqualifies 80 or 90% of people who'd want to be considered, but both of these applicants are technically good enough. One of them is the greatest guitar player who ever lived. Literally just the single greatest guitar player alive. The other one is just barely good enough to do the job. Which of these 2 people would you probably hire? It's a little bit of a trick question, but the answer is whichever one isn't a jerk. Because at the end of the day, I just described to you 2 candidates who are both good enough to do the job. And it just comes down to attitude, and it comes down to temperament and personality mesh with the team. You're looking for someone not just who's going to be good on stage during a 2 or 3 hour set, but who you'd also want to spend time with on the 18 hours in a bus in between those 2 gigs. You want to make sure that you are working with people who don't drive you absolutely insane at the end of the day. And that's true for basically every single field. If you develop the skill set until you've reached what I would call the professional bar of competence, once you're above that range, it doesn't matter how much better you are than it, you're qualified. You're within the realm of potential candidates. And from there, it's about making friends, making connections, and supporting other people and being a part of that community. One of the things that I think has led to a lot of career stability for me is that, generally speaking, I have a very large community. I have a very large network. And that came about because I just went to a lot of events and I helped people out, and I tried to be a good hang, and I tried to make as many friends as I could by taking an active interest in their lives. I would go to something and I'd connect with someone, and it wouldn't matter to me whether or not they were more important than I was, or whether or not they could give me work or I could give them work. It would just be oh, you really Smash Bros. 2? Let's talk about that for 4 hours. I'm just looking to make friends. And over time, it doesn't matter whether or not your friends are going to be able to like give you a job or something like that. You're expanding the overall web of your network. And every single day, think of your network as if it were like a spider web. And every single networking connection, every person you know, they are a point where two threads intersect. On a given day, an electrical pulse blasts through that web, and it checks every single ping to see whether or not there's an opportunity for you to do something with that person. Maybe you don't get anything today, but maybe tomorrow you do. Maybe someone's been on that web for 15 years, and then one day it pings and says, oh, actually, I know a guy. I'll introduce you to him. You know, there are any number of ways that this can work out, and most of them scale with time and with number of people who you connect with. So if you just go out of your way to make friends, and that's really all that it is. You're not trying to convince them to hire you. You're not trying to work with them. You're just trying to make friends. If you just go out and you try and make friends and you start early, you start young, you know, over time, you will find that that stabilizes into a career in whatever area that you've chosen to seek friends in.
I think that's absolutely fantastic advice. I love the analogy of the web, and you know, it's so true. You know, when you're networking, you're not necessarily trying to go, "Ooh, I want them to hire me." You know, like just being real is so important, and you never know when someone within that network is going to go, "Oh, I know somebody who's hiring," or you know. And one of the other things that you mentioned that I love is just kind of being supportive of other people. You don't have to be jealous. You don't have to be like, oh, they can't believe they got, you know, celebrate other people's successes, and success will find you as well. So I think that's just a really great, good karma and a great lesson you shared.
I mean, here's the way that I've always articulated it. I don't perceive myself as being in competition with anyone else in my field, even if we do the exact same things. Because let's be real about it. All of us are good enough by the metric I've described to do the job. It's not generally going to be a case that I lose an opportunity because I just wasn't good enough. That doesn't really happen at this point in my career. What it really does happen is that I probably didn't have the same type of connection that they had with the artist they did choose. Or I didn't have the right vision for what they're looking for, or any number of things. But the overwhelming conclusion that I get every time is, oh, I know the person they hired. Wow, I get to find out what they would do on this gig instead of what I would have done. I'm going to learn from this. This is something that I can analyze because I know, since I went through this process, what I would have done for it. I wonder what they wanted to do differently that made the difference. And that helps inform my process the next time around. You know, every time that I pitch for an opportunity, I'm kind of standing on like the skeletons of every other gig that I didn't get, making me that little bit taller until I managed to reach the bar first.
Makes absolute sense. Let me ask you, as you have gone through education and as technology is coming around, did you have to learn new tools? I mean, obviously, you know, we had you know, analog, digital. We now have, you know, Pro Tools, and obviously that evil word AI. You know, is there a little fear of you know, AI coming in and you know, I need a cello part, AI created?
I mean, honestly, not really. No. At the end of the day, technology changes things one way or another. Is there a legitimately high likelihood that AI is going to change the way that the music industry works? Yeah, I would say it's probably north of 90% at this point. Is there a likelihood that it's going to change the jobs? Same thing. However, are those jobs going to tend to also be filled by musicians? Yeah, probably. You know, the people who were creating music when we were in the analog era and the people who were doing it when we went to digital, there was some churn, some turnover, but at the end of the day, if you were a composer working in digital workplaces, you probably could have been capable of being a composer in analog and vice versa. You know, it's just kind of a changing of the times to a certain point. That said, you know, I will also be very clear and just explicit while we're on a podcast for this, that it's really hard to emotionally and conceptually invest in AI music generation when the material that these algorithms are being trained on is, in many cases, being stolen, when it's, copyright theft. You can't work, I don't want to speak for like the company I work for or anything, but like, I don't feel like I conceptually can bring AI generated music to a client, even if it was something that I, quote, generated or worked on or whatever, because I can't guarantee that it is not copyright infringing. I don't have insight into what this data was trained on. As a result of that, you're going to find that a lot of companies are very hesitant to actually touch it long term until such point as, proper, attribution has been dealt with, until we have a better understanding of, whether or not AI music can even generate copyright. Because current precedent would indicate that it probably doesn't, which means that even if you did deliver AI-generated music, your opponent, your competitor could just take that and start using it because you don't actually own that material anyways. There's a lot of... There are a lot of really concerning questions kind of floating around. Are there AI music tools I'm excited for that will make the editing process easier? Absolutely. There are also non-AI music tools that I'm excited for. I'm kind of a nerd. That's just sort of where I live.
I think that's a very good, insightful answer. And I think you're right. In the end, is it going to be a human that has to control the AI to give it the right direction and publishing and royalties and all that? And I think you bring up some very good points. But yes, ultimately, will it change things? Certainly, as all technology does. It makes things easier, and harder in some other ways, but for the most part, technology is supposed to make things easier. You can't rage against the machine or the machine just takes over.
I honestly worry more about large language model AI stuff Chat GPT than I do about music from Suno or something like that. Because at the end of the day, there are certain things that I think people get better at when you have say a spell checker. And then there are things that you lose over time if you think that you're able to go to something that you think is giving you accurate information or that you think can write your paper for you or what have you. At the end of the day, you're relying on something that you don't understand, and it means you're probably not learning as much in the grand scheme of things. I worry more for students nowadays than I do for the working professionals.
Very, very good point. Let me ask you, you brought up a mentor earlier. You're obviously schooling us and offering mentorship right now to, the next generation of creatives. Who's your biggest mentor?
Oh, God. There have been a lot. I would say that one thing that has really helped me over the course of my career, no real shortage of people who I consider very influential to me. Obviously, Jeff Williams, let's start there. He gave me my first job. So much of what I know about being a media composer, I learned, screwing things up on his show. Dr. Stephen Lias, that professor, the one who I said was a genius back in the Texas University, I wouldn't be a composer without him. Dr. Evgeny Raichev, I wouldn't be the cello player I am without him. Eugene Friesen, he kind of taught me modern jazz-based cello performance that has heavily influenced my harmonic style, and that I would not be a composer in the way that I am today without him. God, I mean, on and on and on. There have been so many. Adam Gubman, brilliant composer who's really, really been influential to me on work ethic and understanding how to be better at the job as a working pro. Brian Schmidt, George Sanger, legends of game audio, who I feel very lucky to get to call friends and who I feel like I learn so much from every time I talk to them. I feel like part of a key to success is constantly finding mentorship, constantly finding ways to find people who are much smarter than you, much better at this, and just, learn as much from them while you can. A lot of these people especially if they're older than you, they're not going to be here forever. You know, you want to make sure to get as much as you can and like take down their stories and like learn the things that they've learned. And, you know, I'm constantly trying to do that. I'm trying to better myself one way or another all the time.
You know, what's also fascinating is the fact that when I ask you about mentors, you have like a laundry list. And I think it's a great example, being appreciative and learning from elders, like you mentioned, but knowing that they come and go in all different parts of your life. And, you know, they don't always have to be older, but like you mentioned, being like a SpongeBob and wanting to learn and take that information and soak it up as much as you can just makes you a better individual all around. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. You've done movies, you've done video games, you've done anime, you've done all the things that you love and you're passionate about. What's the one thing that, you know, obviously Smash Bros was a goal and you knocked that one out. What's the next pinnacle for you? If you could say to yourself, Mason, if you could just do this one gig, what would that dream gig be?
I actually don't have one, and I have a reason for that. So I will say Smash Brothers was my like defining reason for getting like, you know, working at music. It was the reason that I would practice as a kid. And this is kind of funny because I jokingly refer to this as like my midlife crisis at like 20. I accomplished Smash Brothers and I was so excited for it. I was like, oh my God, everything changes. I finally did it. No one cared. I was the only person who seemed to care about this as much as I did. And it kind of made me realize two things very quickly. One, for all intents and purposes, my life did not materially change. Like, maybe there would be some work that would come out of this down the road from people who thought it was cool, but in the grand scheme of things, I was still gonna have to try and figure out how to make rent tomorrow. You know, I still needed to keep working. I wasn't at a finish line. It was just a milestone on the path. And two, frankly, it was probably pretty unhealthy that I had like put so much of my identity and personal passion in a goal that in no way did I have any agency over whether or not I achieved it. Even today, I'm not sure that I could work on another Smash Bros. Title if I was trying and leveraging all of my influence and network right now to get in the room for another one of those projects. It was just sheer dumb luck. And that's amazing. I'm happy that it happened, but like, my God, can you imagine if I had gotten to like 50 or 60 years old and this thing that I built my entire childhood and this fantasy of a career in music in had just never happened? I would be a depressed wreck. And so it made me recontextualize how I build goals for myself. Because I was like, oh, I need to structure this in a way where, one, these goals aren't based on trying to get someone else's approval, because clearly that's just not what a goal should be for. Two, it should be something that is either achievable or it's less out of scope of what is within my realm of agency. And three, I'm lucky that this big goal came together, but I should probably have smaller individual goals and just have a lot of them so that I'm always working towards something. You know what I mean? So for me, there isn't really like a one, oh man, like if I did this one project, it would change everything kind of moment. I'm actually really happy with the work that I'm doing right now, and I just want to keep getting to do more of it. So I look at things much more particular, like, oh, it would be really cool to do music for like a fighting game, for like a fighting level. It would be really cool to work in an MMO in like a fantasy style. It would be really cool to work on like a racing game, you know, F-Zero style. And like, you know, these sorts of things, generally over the course of like a productive career, you have an opportunity to touch a lot of these if you're a freelance composer, because you end up working on a lot of different things over time. And so I found that that generally has worked really well for me, of like, you know, oh, I want to perform this kind of music in this kind of venue. I want to record with this person because I really like their stuff. You know, just more casual, low-key kinds of goals.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and obviously they're measurable, and you can achieve so much more that way. I have one last question, and I know I'm going to save a little time for a few questions. I have two. Talk me through Game Audio Diversity Alliance.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So there is this really lovely organization, the Game Audio Diversity Alliance, that does pretty much exactly what you're assuming that it does, in that they're here to promote, bringing in more people of color, bringing in more diverse genders, so on and so forth, to the career, into video game music, video game sound design, voiceover, etc. Because while obviously I think that the game audio industry is amazing, games in general have not always been the most diverse of places. It's tended to be a lot of people who look more or less like me who end up working in video games. So there's an organization, and there are actually quite a few others as well in similar veins, that's trying to work to extend mentorship opportunities, scholarshiping to attend professional events, so on and so forth, to try and support people who want to get into this field. So in my case, I've worked as a mentor for them in the past, where at Game SoundCon, which is a big industry event that a lot of us tend to go to, I will have a scholar who's been provided with budget to travel to the event and hotel room and their badge. I will kind of be their mentor, and I'll be like, hey, tell me a little bit about your goals, tell me about yourself, show me your music. All right, based on all these things, here's the stuff that I think would be really good for you. You should attend these talks, and I'm going to get you invited to these parties. And here are 5 people that I think would be great for you to meet. And let me try and make sure that this is as productive an event for you as possible. And if you have any questions, come to me and I'll help out. And there are a bunch of people who are involved in doing this stuff. I'm not a part of leadership of this organization. I just like their mission. But that's GATA. That's the game.
It's super rad, and I absolutely love such good karma, and what a catalyst to lift others up and give them an opportunity. All right, my last question.
The shirt until you asked about it.
Yeah, it's all good. If you had the goatee and the matching, you know what I mean, I'd wear one as well. My last question, and it's probably you have found success at such an early age, but if there was one piece of advice you would give to a younger Mason, what would that be?
And I know this probably sounds silly coming from me of all people, but it takes a long time and to have some patience. There are a lot of things that I thought that I figured out, as my story kind of shows, when I was very young. And I've since realized, I'm like, yeah, no, I didn't know what I was talking about, but now I do. No, you still didn't know, but now I do. And I have a feeling that pattern is probably going to repeat for the rest of my life. I'm reasonably confident that 10 years from now, I'm going to come across this podcast and be like, who is this idiot? Why is he talking so much? So I think that stay hungry to learn, constantly keep pursuing ways to improve yourself, and try to, this sounds silly, but be the worst person in your community. Find a way where all the people surrounding you are much more excellent than you are, and then aspire to reach their level. That's generally a really healthy way of going and improving yourself long term. And then generally speaking, if you find down the road that you're in a position where you can help other people, where you could spread information, knowledge, whatever that may be, kick the ladder down and help other people out. Because at the end of the day, it's all about your community, and it's all about the people who follow after us. Because my job is never going to love me. If I crunch super, super hard, they're not going to write that on my tombstone. The only thing that's really going to leave when I'm gone is hopefully the art that I made, I hope, and the people whose lives I touched. So my hope is to help other people however I can. And
you might be the most insightful Lieberman other than myself.
You know what? I'll take that number 2 slot. It's an honor.
No, I think you might have number 1. All right, let's go to some questions real quick.
With stuff in the portfolio like The Walking Dead and Made in Abyss, Was there any project you're doing which you were like, nope?
As far as like a project that I turned down?
Due to not being in your genre, so to speak, like cowardice, etc. Cowardice in front of horror stuff, or etc.
So 2 answers for that. One, generally speaking, I've always tried to say yes in whatever way that I can. And to clarify what I mean by that, there are projects where I'm just not the right fit, or I shouldn't be the person who's doing it. I've had instances, and I won't say what it is, but I once got reached out to about scoring a superhero project where it was blatantly clear to me that I should not be the person who was scoring that thing for a variety of reasons. And where I basically told them, hey, I would love to do this, but more than that, I'd love to see someone else do this. How about I introduce you to this person and you give them the job, and I will be available as a production, person, as like an artist collaborator, but let's, make sure that the right person gets the work for this one. So in some cases that's happened. In some cases I've been unavailable to do something. But I always try to solve the problem whenever I'm asked. So it's rare that I would ever get reached out to about a gig and just say, no, goodbye forever. Usually it would be like, oh, I'm so sorry, my schedule is packed during this time, but I think that maybe these people would be a good fit for the solution. Would you like an intro? Let me close the loop so that you can meet these people and then tell me how it goes.
Great question and a great answer. Saying yes, but having some stipulations and what self-awareness as well being displayed. Always
find a way to solve the problem for people, even if you yourself cannot be the solution. That's kind of how I'd summarize it.
Super insightful right there. All right, Aiden, you're up next.
So you mentioned working on RWBY. Which tracks did you work on when it came to composing? Because I always find that is very interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of the crediting was a little bit janky, but most of season 3. If you look up, I was one of the primary composers in season 3. I worked on the acoustic tracks in season 2. They actually were originally, the tradition of doing acoustic tracks on the soundtrack came out of RTX 2014, where me, Jeff, Casey, and my buddy David, who introduced me to the music, decided to do like an acoustic jam session of the music on an RTX Music of RWBY panel that you can actually probably find footage of on YouTube. Like if you look up RTX Music of RWBY 2014, like you can find little baby Mason like performing on this stuff. And if you listen to it and then you look at the season 2 soundtrack, you're like, oh, some of these arrangements are very familiar. That's because we decided to do those on the soundtrack after we had that jam session. And my work on those season 2 arrangements is part of what led to me getting hired on the show as a composer after that point.
Perfect. I just want to honestly thank you for your time. I know you are going to be traveling very, very soon. What an insightful guest you have been. I'm there, just a wealth of knowledge and honestly really good lessons on how you have to have resilience. You have to have drive. You have to be the one to put yourself in a position to find success. And I think there were lots of examples of how Mason was not that individual to stay home, play video games, and eat pizza. Like going to those parties, and I'm sure there's a lot of that too, and that's okay. But on days that you're not doing that, putting yourself in a position to honestly network, help others, and be of service is very important. And saying yes and knowing when to say yes and how to say no, really, I think the parameters that Mason shared is very important. So when you can knock out the job, when there's someone else who could maybe be that better composer or someone who is better for the job. And guess what? That comes in, it's like that good karma thing, right? Like you help someone else get that gig, they're going to come back eventually and go, hey, so-and-so, my buddy who's a great cello player, can come in and knock that out the park. So I want you to understand community is important. Networking is important, and it can be real and organic, and you can talk about things that you love. And most importantly, don't be a jerk, right? Like if you're going to be on that 18-hour bus, you want to be surrounded by a Mason chilling and laughing and having a good time. No one wants that pretentious jerk. So, Mason, I wish you continued success in your career. I think for our composers in here, our sound designers, our video game animators, our animation people, your speaking definitely is resonating with them. I'm seeing the head nods. I'm seeing that they get it. So on that note, you have done your service. Mentorship is important. We will check offline. I'm going to do the 23andMe and find out if you are my soul brother. I already know you are, but let's do that. And when you get back from Japan, hit me up. Let's connect.
As we conclude another enriching episode, we hope you found inspiration in the stories shared today. Let's take a moment to honor Yes I Can's role in bringing Breaking the Biz to life. Yes I Can's commitment to empowering young people with disabilities through education, advocacy, and mentorship shines brightly, paving paths of opportunity and dialogue. This podcast celebrates the organization's dedication to nurturing talent and facilitating impactful discussions. Breaking the Biz is more than a podcast. It's a part of Yes I Can's broader mission to amplify voices, dismantle barriers, and craft a world that's more inclusive and accessible for everyone. Each episode is a chapter in our shared narrative of progress, education, and empowerment, driven by the spirit of Yes I Can. Thank you for spending your time with us on Breaking the Biz. Continue to challenge the status quo and share stories that resonate. Until our paths cross again, let's keep transforming aspirations into achievements and infuse every endeavor with optimism. Here's to advancing the landscape of the entertainment industry, one episode at a time. I'm your host, William Felber. See you next time.